stream. It's another one of those shows where I was going to upload the video, but I figured, well, if I'm going to go ahead and record it, I might as well go ahead and do it live, and then whoever's here can join me. And then maybe there'll be some questions we can also take. But since things worked out that way, I'm happy to do it. And we'll get started here in just a second. We're going to discuss, as you can see from the thumbnail, John 5:23 and Revelation 5:13 through 14. Now, I've talked about these texts, in particular John 5:23, many times, but not in an extended way where I could clip something from a video I've done, at least that I could see from what I reviewed. So I figured, well, I'll just go ahead and do a video and cover it sufficiently now. And also, again, Revelation 5:13 through 14, because some Trinitarians use them together. And I think they actually go together just fine. The problem is, of course, when we're dealing with Trinitarians, and that's what this video is specific to, why Trinitarians fail to understand honor and worship in John 5:23 and Revelation 5:13 through 14. Well, what is it they're failing to understand? Well, first of all, anytime a Trinitarian starts talking about the Bible and what they believe it says, they're already assuming the Trinity, the doctrine that there's one God, but who exists in three persons that are co-equal, co-eternal, and share the same essence of being. A belief that can be traced back to Constantine in the 4th century, the Council of Nicaea that he presided over and contributed the key term homoousios. So Trinitarians believe that Jesus receives the same level of everything, honor, glory, worship, because they believe he's God in the same sense that the Father is God. Now, again, they have a later metaphysical view of God that they read back into the Bible, this one being of God shared by three persons. Tomorrow, we're going to do a whole show about how many persons is God in the Bible in the Trinity, part 25. I'm sorry, that'll be Sunday. Today's Friday. So good evening, Betsy. Good to see you, Henry, and also Jordan. Thank you for joining me, and anyone else, of course, who is able to join us live or who watches later. We're talking about John 5:23 and the honor and worship, honor specifically in that text, but Trinitarians connect it with Revelation 5:13 and 14 and associate the worship and honor that's described there with what they say is to be done just as, right? They focus, when it comes to John 5:23, this question of, well, it says, Jesus says you have to honor the Son just as, KATHOS in Greek, you honor the Father. And they say, well, see, there in Revelation 5:13 through 14, they're both being honored just in the same way as that, so they have to be equal, right? I don't believe you're going to come away from this video concluding that's the case. Even if we just set aside, which we are, let's just set aside this whole reading back into the Bible, the metaphysic of God. We're going to talk a lot about that this Sunday on part 25, Bible and the Trinity conflict. But it's important to know that whenever you talk to Trinitarians, so I want to mention it. But let's just focus on this question of what kind of honor, what kind of worship is being discussed there in John 5:23 and Revelation 5:13 through 14. So let's go ahead and bring up those texts. Yeah. Move this over here, and then I'll go ahead and bring you guys up here. I'll have the Bible Hub and NWT here, but I've pretty much got the text group together we're going to read, so it'll save a little time and also help us to focus on, the key issues here, which in terms of John 5:23, right, it doesn't use the word for worship, proskuneo, or sometimes latruo. And in Revelation 5:13 through 14, it uses proskuneo, but not latruo, right? So But proskuneo can mean worship, but it is applied to numerous figures in the Bible in the sense of honor or reverence or bow down before, including Jesus' own disciples in Revelation 3:9. In the very same book that we're talking about in part, Jesus says he's going to make the Jews who say they're Jews but are not come and worship before his followers' feet, and to know that he has loved them. That's what that indicates. There's a difference between worshiping or honoring someone who is representing the Father because they're, in Jesus and in his followers' case, they're willing to die for it. But that's a different kind of honor. It's similar but different. And so this brings us to the question of, well, what about just as, right? Trinitarians will say, well, it says just as. So they take that to mean the exact same way. No difference no matter what. Is that what it means? Well, I'm going to show both that's not what it means in many instances, and that in Revelation 5, there's no way you could conclude that the honor is the same. I'll show you that. All right. And good to see you, Everett and Jason. Okay, let's get to some of these texts. Are you ready? Let me go ahead and just get it big enough for you there. So I have to adjust this once you're here. Little bonus video tonight, right? Well, again, I figured instead of just doing my own little video here all alone, let's see who's out there. Let's do a live stream. Say hello to everybody. And make it enjoyable for everyone. And tomorrow, Saturday night, at least it'll be Saturday night for me in California. Saturday night, probably around 7:30, 8 o'clock. We're going to do Christian Witnesses of Jah live discussion number 4. So if you want to be there with us while we talk about different things that affect us as Christian Witnesses of Jah and partake of the bread and wine at the end, you're welcome to do so. Then 2 live streams on Sunday. Oh yeah, we've got, like I said, the Bible and the Trinity in Conflict, part 25. How many persons is the God of the Bible? And we're also going to do a comments review video. I might upload that one. It'll either be a live stream or I'll upload it early in the morning, earlier in the day, and then Bible and the Trinity in Conflict later. And it's going to be a review of the monument to Sam Shamoun's heresies, right? It's exactly as I said it would be. And remember, we're dealing with unusual individuals here. Sam and his followers are not your typical people. They're certainly not who we look for, right? But they're here. We have to deal with them. They go out of their way to disrupt people in ways that, we all have to make decisions about what we're going to do, to what extent, right? I'm more of a public figure like Sam, and so we have to choose. Just because I might choose to do something doesn't mean that's what you would choose to do. Not everybody even cares about the Trinity like we talk about in these videos, right? But I don't do what I do just to please a specific individual, right? I do what I do to please God. And I try to, of course, listen to people and better myself. But I'm not, we're different, as I've said. And a lot of people seem to think that we only ever have to talk about what they want to talk about, right? And unfortunately, that's just not the case. You're free to talk about it and listen to whatever you want, and I'm free to do the same. And the Trinity is an issue that sometimes we have to deal with, and we're going to keep documenting it, whether it's with regard to Sam Shamoun's heresies or just the Trinity as a non-biblical doctrine going all the way back to Constantine, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to document once it's been around long enough to where we have to make it absolutely clear that this is false doctrine, right? This is that we're following the Bible. They're following something else. Yeah, they use the Bible. A lot of them are sincere. It's unfortunate we are where we are, but we're not the ones who did this. We didn't redefine the metaphysic of the Bible. We didn't take God's name out of the Bible. We didn't add to the persons of the God of the Bible. We don't create contradictory concepts involving one person knowing and not knowing all things. Or that he shares eternally the same nature as the God who is said to have imprinted him into existence as his firstborn. Terms and ideas, concepts associated with how we live and work. And so, again, it's not just that, right? It's only begotten. It's distinctions in terms of theos, not person. John 1:1, John 10:30 through 36. We have Jesus using a text with the plural for gods in his defense. Everything we believe and teach is exactly what is taught in those texts. You get to the Trinity, it's a whole different deal, right? I mean, everything is different. And that's unfortunately what has happened with regard to our subject text as well. But as I said earlier, we don't really need to get too much into it, but I'm kind of going over some of the things that we're going to be talking about, right, on Sunday, right, the monument to Sam's shame and heretical teachings and false doctrine, right? So now there'll be no excuse. And as anyone who reads those comments can see, they did exactly what I said they would do, right? Just repeated the same already refuted arguments, or we refuted them. Even this subject here, I explained to, as we'll see on Sunday, an individual, the meaning of KATHOS, and he just collapsed. Totally collapsed. So either way, let's go ahead and do this video so that we understand clearly what the Bible teaches about honor and worship in John 5:23 and Revelation 4:13 through 14. And so we can explain it to Trinitarians and also have a proper understanding ourselves. So let's see. I did make this big enough. Let's see if it's going to fit. Okay. I guess that's okay. Let me see if I can make it a little bigger. There we go. All right, so we'll go to that next. Let's start with this just as, right? So our one of our subject texts, John 5:23, is where we're going to start right here. And I'm going to use the New World Translation. And if anyone has a difference with it or thinks it's incorrect, you're free to put it down in the chat or in the comments and we'll talk about it. But I don't think there's any problem with the text we're going to be considering. So it's on you to point that out if you feel different. John 5:22, for the Father judges no one at all. Good to see you, by the way, Bankhead and Answer Tree. I wanted to get that in real quick. Father judges no one at all. This is Jesus talking. The Father judges no one at all. Why? Why wouldn't the Father judge someone? He goes on to say, but he has committed all the judging to the Son. So, I meant to bring this up in the Bible Hub, and I may do that, but let me just point it out, because it's really just one word here. The word in Greek for committed is a form of the Greek word didomi. Dedoken is the exact word, which is a form of didomi, which means to give. Okay? Father judges no one at all, but he gives all judging to the Son. So that tells us two things, right? Father had all judging. Father had that authority. And the Son did not. And then the Father gave it to the Son. Verse 23, in order that. Okay, so the Father gives all authority to judge to the Son for a reason. That all may honor the Son, just as, the Greek word is kathos, they honor the Father. He that does not honor the Son does not honor the Father who sent him. So we can see clearly here that in these texts, we're talking about judgment, right? We're talking about, like, when you think of a judge in a court who has the authority to find you guilty or to sentence you, how do you feel, or how would you feel, right? It would be intimidating. You would understand this. Your life is in this person's hands. You would be very respectful, I'm pretty sure. So the Father has this authority and honor because of that authority. And then he gives it to the Son, so that the Son can have the same honor in this judging that takes place. All right. So we're gonna find out more about this honor in a minute. Let's go ahead and highlight that word, red and bold, and highlight it, italicize it, because we want to make sure we cover it. Right now, we're going to focus on, like the subheading says, just as, okay? So honor, right, we understand it kind of a little in this context, clearly provided of judgment. It's exactly what it's connected to. There's no question about it. And it says the Father has it, now he doesn't, because he gave it to the Son. To me, right there, that contradicts the Trinity. The Son did not have, whatever it is that leads to the honoring of the Son here, and for Trinitarians, it's worship, okay? Like you're going to see in Revelation 5. Whatever it is, and I think that's kind of correct, but their level of worship, right, is the same. They're all worshipped as God equally. But here, it makes it very clear, right, that the honor the Son is getting is because of the judgment, the authority to judge he's getting. And the Father had it because he's God, you know. And God can give authority to others. He gave the authority to judge to an angel in Exodus 23. He says to listen to that angel because he will not pardon you. He will not pardon you. Listen to him. And of course, the angel is doing God's will just like Jesus. The angel had the authority to kill and not kill. God can give this authority. Trinitarians often say, well, Jesus is being given judgment and authority that only God could have. Well, no, that's actually begging the question. That's a circular argument. It's known as you assuming your conclusion, only God could have this authority, and using that as your argument. Only God could have this authority. I don't know why you Trinitarians, many of whom are very well educated and logical, but when it comes to the Trinity, it's like your false doctrine just makes you go bananas or something. Right? So, very clearly, whatever honor is being given to the Son here is based on him being given authority to judge. It directly says that at the start of verse 23. Hina. In order that, so that. The Father judges no one at all. Why? Because he doesn't have authority? No, he doesn't, because he gave it to the Son. See, when you give someone authority, like when God gave the angel the authority to kill or not kill in Exodus 23, that means God trusts that angel to do what he's supposed to do. And if he doesn't, well then, like when Satan obviously didn't do what he was supposed to do, God will deal with it. The angel in Exodus 23 did what he was supposed to do. Jesus did what he was supposed to do. God, who has this authority, that leads to him being honored in John 5:22 and 23 gives it, Trinitarians, didomi, temporal. There's nothing here about eternity. It wouldn't even make sense, right? It's not, eternity is not a place we're in. You guys just assume that too, right? Just one thing after another. And it says very clearly he's given authority to judge so that people will honor him the way they honor the Father who had the authority. So there's no way the honor could be the same, just based on these very texts alone. Because the honor that is to the Father is to the honor that is due to him because it's his authority to give or not give, as you're going to see when we get to Revelation. The reason we honor the Son is because the Father gives him the authority. If the Father doesn't give the Son this authority, Trinitarians, he wouldn't be given the honor the same as the Father. It is directly tied to a temporal act that absolutely refutes the Trinity as a biblical doctrine, right? It can be classified as a later pagan hybrid Christian doctrine or whatever, right? It has to be isolated as non-biblical. The Trinity needs to be removed from the category of possible biblical teachings. It's nuts to think it's in the Bible. You're not necessarily nuts if you believe in the Trinity, right? Many of you are sincere and very well educated and well thinking, and it makes sense in many ways. I understand. It's nuts to say the Bible teaches the Trinity, okay? No, it does not. Not word for word or conceptually. Your doctrine is based on Constantine, whom, as I'm going to show in a forthcoming series about idolatry, Roman Catholic idolatry, Eastern Orthodox idolatry, Protestant idolatry. Your belief in the Trinity goes back to probably the founder of Christian idolatry, right? Not the one who, right, because they were worrying about it in the first century, but certainly the one who established it, right? Constantine is the great idolater. You want to see idolatry? You just watch. You watch my upcoming series about Roman Catholic idolatry. It all starts with Constantine, in my opinion. And again, that doesn't mean there weren't instances before, but Constantine not only totally redefined the metaphysic of God in the Bible, but when it comes to idols, I don't, this is something he was very involved with. I'll say that. Well, and then later, just when that video is ready, you'll see. So I think very clearly, John 5:22 through 23, just on its own, not only refutes the doctrine of the Trinity that's not taught metaphysically in the Bible and in conflict with the metaphysic that is taught, Hebrews 1:3 and many other texts, but it shows very clearly the honor is different, right? The honor given to the Father is the one with authority to give or not give the authority. Honor to the Son is because the Father gives him the authority. A temporal act showing he was not equal with God from eternity in terms of his authority, and he was not in a position to therefore be honored equally with the Father because he didn't have the authority that necessitates that honor, Trinitarians. It's given to him right here. Your own argument defeats you. The argument that the honor here is the honor only to be given to God is defeated by the fact it's given by God to someone else. The one you say is God, but who couldn't possibly be honored as the same as the Father for the very reasons we just explained. The Father doesn't have to be given authority to receive the honor that you say shows someone is God. Jesus has to be given that authority, showing that receiving that authority and being honored for receiving it does not make you God. It makes you someone whom God appoints, like the angel in Exodus 23, to represent him and to, because of that, be honored as he is, or you die. Let's go on further and talk about this just as, right? Okay, I think just contextually, the very immediate context of the subject verse, John 5:23, makes it very clear. Verse 22, there's a clear difference here, and there's temporality where it concerns the authority that the Son receives that leads to the honor Trinitarians say is due only to God, disproving them. Right? Their own argument refutes them when you actually read the preceding verse, right? Verse 22. Now this just as, and then we'll go back to more of that honor. There's a lot more, but I think just looking at verse 22 and connecting the two, there's clearly a difference in terms of the type of honor. It's similar, of course it is. The honor is because the Father has the authority, and to the Son because the Father gives him the authority. The Father isn't judging anyone. He totally trusts the Son. Why? Trinitarians, you already know, and you won't even argue with me, right? The Son does only what the Father tells him and teaches him. Very clear. Even when it comes to the revelation of information he's supposed to pass on to other people. Revelation 1:1. So, however you look at this, there's clearly a difference when it comes to honoring the Father and the Son and this authority to judge. But it's obviously similar too. The Son is representing the Father, so much so the Father isn't judging anyone. He's letting the Son do it. So of course it's going to be similar. It's going to be exactly the same in terms of what judgment is given, right? And the honor you're going to give to Jesus is therefore the same. He's on the Father's throne. Just as Jesus is going to make people come and worship before his followers' feet, proskuneo, Revelation 3:9, so the Father sits his Son on his throne and allows people to worship him as him, right? As if he's the Father. All knees bow to Jesus in heaven and on earth, Philippians 2:9-11, to the glory of God the Father. Not the glory of God the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. The glory of one person, Trinitarians, like we're going to talk about on Sunday. The Father. The one God of the Bible. There's no difference, trust me, you're going to see, in terms of the worship in Philippians 2:9-11 and the worship in Revelation 5, in terms of what is being given. Well, there is a difference actually in Revelation 5, but we'll get to it. But it's consistent with the conclusion of Philippians 2:9-11 because it's to the glory of the Father, Trinitarians. I don't know how many times we have to explain that to you, or you have to read it. It's not to Jesus' glory. It's not to the glory of Jesus, the Father, and the Holy Spirit's glory. Everything done to Jesus is to the glory of the Father. So what's this just as? And you're going to see that very clearly in Revelation 5 as well. You just wait. Let's look at just as, same Greek word, in John 17:11. Also, I am no longer in the world, but they are in the world. And I am coming to you, Holy Father. Watch over them on account of your name, which you have given me, in order that they may be one, just as we are. Another text, of course, that Trinitarians never seem to bring up when they quote John 10:30, right? I and the Father are one. They love to quote that text and claim it's like a metaphysical oneness, consistent with, Constantine, homoousios. And those same Trinitarians will take us to John 5:23 and emphasize just as, that's like it's the exact same. And then when we bring them to texts like John 17:11 and say, well, you just said I and the Father are one, John 10:30 means Trinity? Because John 17:11 says Jesus is talking to God and saying he wants his followers to be one, just as Trinitarians. And then that's usually, of course, when you jump to another text because you've been exposed, right? You are misusing the Bible when it comes to John 10:30. I and the Father are one, which contextually, he goes on to quote Psalm 82 to show that he's one of the sons of God who are gods according to God and the Son of God in that account. But you just quote part of it, and of course you think it sounds like Trinity, right? You just don't actually explore what the oneness of Jesus and God is being discussed in the Bible in that text and others, nor are you consistent with your just as equivalency in John 5:23 when it's used in other texts that refute your view. How convenient. Yeah, I think it's because the oneness here is not Trinitarian, and it's a oneness of purpose and worship and belief. And of course, I doubt that the disciples will ever be one in the exact same way Jesus and the Father are. When you look at the history of their relationship, it kind of goes a lot farther back. But it's pretty close, right? If they are willing to die like Jesus died and they're given authority, right? They are, as you're going to see, on the very same throne Jesus is on, his Father's throne, the throne of God. The very throne being discussed in Revelation 5. Hey, thank you, Henry. I appreciate that. It's very kind of you. Tarantula Clan, always good to see you as well. John 17:20 through 22. I make requests, same chapter of John, of course, that we just read from. Not concerning these only, Jesus talking to the only true God, verse 3, but also concerning those putting faith in me through their word. Verse 21, in order that they all may be one, just as you, Father, are in or in union with me, and I am in or in union with you, that they also may also be in or in union with us, in order that the world may believe you sent me forth. Also, I've given them the glory that you have given me, in order that they may be one just as we are one. Trinitarians, look at all this stuff from Jesus himself, the Master, the one Lord of Christians, made so by God the Father himself, just as Trinitarians, they may all be one, just as, for the second time in the same chapter in prayer to God, Trinitarians. Why do you miss this when it comes to your misunderstanding of John 10:30? Why do you miss these texts when it comes to your misunderstanding of John 5:23? It's because you fail to understand the honor and worship because of the Trinity. False doctrine gets in the way. It's unfortunate. It happens. We understand, kind of. But if you're really committed to these texts, it's time for you to either stop making such terrible arguments or come to grips with what the Bible teaches, right? And then in verse 22, he says, I have given them the glory you gave me. Trinitarians, the temporality is out of control, right? We not only have all these temporal terms, right? Son, firstborn, only begotten, imprint, right? Beginning, right, of God's creation. Almost every temporal term you can imagine could be used to describe someone as temporal in relation to someone else is used of Jesus. And yet, all of a sudden, somehow our doctrine is wrong. And theirs is right, which contradicts temporality with eternal generation and nonsense ideas about time, and certainly non-biblical. It just never ends, right? Glory. We're talking about honor, right? Worship, glory, as you're going to see as well. It also, of course, glory to God the Father in Philippians 2, and you'll see it come up in Revelation as well. But it's given to Jesus, Trinitarians. Just like the authority to judge is given to Jesus in John 5:23, in John 5:22, in order that he's honored just as the Father, because he wasn't honored that way before, because he didn't have the authority that only God had before. So he couldn't have been being honored as God from eternity the way the Father is. Therefore, it's not the same. Trinitarians. It's the same thing with the glory, Trinitarians. The glory that Jesus receives is not from eternity. It's given to him. And Jesus gives it to the disciples. Why? in order that they may be one just as. The third time, Trinitarians. And you guys still miss it every single time. They may be one, Trinitarians. So you here not only have, excuse me, Jesus receiving temporality, definitely not God from eternity, therefore equal to the Father, and the disciples being given that same glory. In order that, Trinitarians, for the purpose of Trinitarians being one, just as KATHOS, John 5:23, Trinitarians, Jesus says they're given the same glory he was given, so that they're one just as the Father and the Son are one. So we know that what Trinitarians have been teaching about this oneness, I and the Father are one, John 10:30, is false. It's false doctrine. It's just reading the Bible in light of the Trinity and ignoring how the Bible actually explains these texts, right? So, yes, Jordan McKissick, I think it is. I apologize if that's incorrect. He asks, hold up, didn't Jesus say he had the same glory with the Father before the world was? Yes, he did. That glory was given to him. Didn't you just read the text we just read and that I emphasized? I know you heard that. Maybe you didn't read it, but it's like it's on the other half of the screen you're probably watching. Do you see that that highlighted red emphasized part right there in John 17:22? He's given the glory, Jordan. When he was created as the firstborn, you should read the account in Proverbs, which is directly linked to the Messiah in Micah 5. I did a whole video on it. So you're clearly not up to speed on some of these issues. You need to do a little studying, a lot of homework. Don't interrupt the live stream anymore. We've answered your questions to this point, and this show isn't about you, okay? You're confused by false doctrine. You obviously can't read a highlighted text that's in red, under italicized, and bold. He was given the glory. Okay, good. I appreciate that. You're right. Don't worry, Jordan. Remember, I don't really know you, and I don't know most of you. And so I have to treat you based on how you're actually writing. And I may not always, we may not always be communicating right for that reason, right? Text is not really a good conveyor of personality. And so I'm reacting to the text, and I have to just deal with what you say, right? I don't have, this video will be watched by many people, and so I have to deal with whatever comes up. You may mean it in a totally different way, and that's fine. But I just deal with the information, right? I don't even know most of you, so don't take it personal. A lot of people take what I say personally, but it's just based on what they're writing or saying to me, right? And I'm either right or I'm wrong. So if I'm right, maybe the problem is you and not me. If I'm wrong, then you have to point that out. Okay. Now, I'm going to do one thing. I'm going to use the restroom real quickly, and then we'll continue. I'll be right back. All right. Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate you waiting. When you got to go, right? Okay. Now, that was a good question, Jordan. Don't worry about it. Sometimes, though, we do get questions by Trinitarians that aren't just asking to find out. They ask the same question over and over and over again. So until we really know what you're about, again, it's not always easy to tell where a person's coming from, and we have to deal with the information, right? It's on the chat and it's in the live show. So, we just have to keep going forward, and we all learn from each other and hopefully become better as a result. Okay, back to this just as, right? So I think we've shown very clearly we've got a lot of things already, right? This whole just as isn't the only thing so far. We have a lot here about the oneness issue, glory, that whole teaching about the authority that leads to the honor itself being given to the Son. But let's go more on this whole just as, KATHOS, right? Does that create a kind of equivalency between how we're to honor the Father? Well, we already showed contextually that's not the case. And so far, the just as, it seems like it's more of a similar, but not exactly the same. But let's go further. Ephesians 4:32, become kind to one another, tenderly compassionate, freely forgiving one another, just as. Let me make sure that can show up there. God also by Christ freely forgave you. Would you say that we forgive each other in exactly the same way without any difference in degree, right? Because that's what Trinitarians are saying in John 5:23, that KATHOS, just as, means there's no difference in terms of the degree of honor you're supposed to give to Jesus or the Father. Even though, again, contextually we can show there is a difference, but the similarity is such that because it's the same authority the Father already had as God, as the one God from eternity, he gives it to the Son temporally, because the Son isn't God from eternity, so he doesn't already have that authority, and he's not being honored as God from eternity, therefore. But because now the Father is entrusting that authority to him in the exact same way he's entrusted it to his servants before. I gave the example of the angel in Exodus 23, which could be the prehuman Jesus. That does not make you God from eternity. It means you're given authority by God to act for him. That's it. In fact, it proves you're not God. Because if you were God, you'd already have that authority. You would already be receiving the honor because you're God. Not because someone is putting you on the throne and saying, you are God for me, right? Just like with Moses, basically to Pharaoh, only obviously in a heavenly sense, a greater sense. And Jesus is the greater Moses. So Moses can act as God to Pharaoh because he's what? Speaking God's words and doing his will. Well, how can that not be true for Jesus? It's not only true for angels throughout the Old Testament and New. Jesus explains over and over and over again that he's only telling us what he learned from the Father, that the Father is actually acting through him. It's not his will, it's not his teaching, not his words. So again, he says, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father, because he's working through me. This isn't me, it's him. If we didn't have that kind of explicit and repeated instruction that explains what this is, what's going on, I might be able to understand more of why Trinitarians have a hard time with this. But when you look at it in the context of the Bible, I just don't see a problem. It's so obvious this is being given to Jesus no matter what it is. Glory, authority, honor. It's because of the Father. You know what it's because of? It's because of the Father. But you're going to see it's because of something very specific that the Father gave him this for. Hang on. All right, so I think Ephesians 4:32 again, just as. I don't think we freely forgive just as God does. It's similar, right? But we're not in the exact same way freely forgiving as God is. Ephesians 5:1 and 2, therefore become imitators of God. That's how we are, right? We're similar. We do our best. We're clearly not as good as God when it comes to forgiving. God doesn't make mistakes when it comes to forgiveness. We do. Therefore, become imitators of God as beloved children and go on walking in love, just as the Christ also loved you and delivered himself up for you as an offering and as a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling odor. I don't think we love each other the exact same degree to which Jesus loved us. I don't believe that. I think we do try. I think we should try. I think sometimes we do. I don't think we are as good as Jesus when it comes to loving and delivering himself or ourselves up. We can do similar. We can get close. We can do what he does at times, but we also do not. We also fail. He did not. So clearly, just as does not mean an absolute equivalency in terms of the degree to which what is being discussed happens. Ephesians 5:24, in fact, as the congregation is in subjection to the Christ, so let wives also be to their husbands in everything. That one I might not have meant to put in here. So I don't see just as there, so that might have been an error on my part. I apologize. Go ahead and remove that. 1 Thessalonians 5:3, whenever it is they are saying peace and security, then sudden destruction is to be instantly upon them, just as the pangs of distress upon a pregnant woman, and they will by no means escape. I don't know that the tribulation is going to be exactly like the birth pangs of a pregnant woman in the full degree of trauma and urgency. I think it'll be pretty close, and you women might be able to give a better explanation, but I don't think they'll be the same in every way. I think that they're similar enough to for Paul to use like this, and it will be very urgent, obviously, but they're obviously very different, right? The urgency that you're feeling in pregnancy versus the urgency that you're feeling from external forces that are threatening you. Similar, different. Hebrews 4:10, for the man that has entered into God's rest has also himself rested from his own works, just as God did from his own. Are we entering into God's rest in the exact same way that God rested as God? We're being compared here with God in the same way that Jesus is being compared with God in John 5:23 when it comes to honor. Honor the Son just as. And Trinitarians are saying that's the same level of degree of honor and worship, no difference. Well, we've shown again contextually and from the use of just as so far, that doesn't appear to be the case. Right here, it also doesn't appear to be the case, right? So we can be compared with God just like Jesus in John 5:23 in a way that does not involve the exact same existence of rest that he experiences. Hebrews 11:12, hence also from one man, and him as good as dead, there were born children, just as the stars of heaven for multitude, and as the sands that are by the seaside innumerable. So, we're talking about Abraham and his children. I don't believe, that it says there were born children just as the stars of heaven for multitude, and as the sands that are by the seaside innumerable. I think probably the number of children born, that there were not as many as stars or sands of the sea. Let's just go to Hebrews 11 real quickly to make sure. Hebrews 11:12, right? Yeah. So we're talking about Abraham and his children. I don't believe would qualify as being equal to the number of stars and sands, Trinitarians. It's similar. That's what it means. It's something similar. It's like it. And in the context of John 5:23, that's exactly what it was talking about. The Father had this authority that gave him the honor that you say is due only to God alone. He gives it, ditto me, to the Son, so that the Son can have that honor too, because the Son wasn't God from all eternity and therefore didn't have that authority and didn't have the honor that came with it. The Father gives it to the Son so that the Son can be honored in that way as the one given the authority, not as the one who always had it. Clear difference. Just like we know there's a difference with all these other texts. 1 John 2:1, my little children, I'm writing you these things that you may not commit a sin, and yet, if anyone does commit a sin, we have a helper with the Father, Jesus Christ, a righteous one. Miroslav, good to see you. Verse 6, right? So right in verse 1, he says he doesn't want us to commit a sin. But if we do commit a sin, we have a helper, Jesus, right? The one we can appeal to the Father and get forgiveness. But then in verse 6, just a few verses later, he says, he that remains in union with him is under obligation to go on walking just as KATHOS, that one walked. Can anyone walk exactly as Jesus walked? Did Jesus sin? Okay, so we know we can be like him, right? We can try to get close. We absolutely cannot equal him in how we walk. And yet John knew that, right? In verse 1 right here. So he clearly knows, and we're talking about John who also wrote John 5:23. At least in my view, and I believe many Trinitarians. Clearly, we have a difference, but it's a similarity that shows something should be done like something else, although not exactly in the same degree as the thing that you were to be like. Right? The Father already was honored that way, and now the Son is going to be honored like the Father in a similar way, just like we see with these examples. There's the one who's already that way, and then there are others who, or in Jesus' case in John 5, one who's going to be like the one who's already that way because he's being given something that the one who was already that way always had. 1 John 3:3, and everyone who has his hope set upon himself purifies himself, just as that one is pure. Are we as pure, same degree as Jesus? No. And we can be considered righteous like him, right? And we can do things that are like him. But it's even if the righteousness is imputed to us because of him, it says purifies himself just as that one is pure. It's talking about what we do to ourselves, not what God does in terms of our salvation. Purifies himself just as that. Can we do that? Can we purify ourselves to the same extent Jesus is pure? Of course not. But we can be like him. We can be pure just as he was pure to the extent that we try, right? Very clear what this word means, everybody. But Trinitarians act like it's just 100% same thing. Honor, same thing. What? He was given the authority to receive that honor? Trinity. What? I and the Father are one? Trinity. It says one just as we are one. So it contradicts the Trinity on I and the Father are one and the whole just as argument from John 5:23? Huh. Oh well, Trinity. Right? This is how it seems to me. They're committed to their doctrine, everyone. This is for you. Right? It might be helpful to some of them, and especially for the monument to Sam's heresies. When this comes up, just boom, post a link. Right? We already addressed it actually there, just refuted it. But now we have a nice video, John 5:22-23, Revelation 5, we're going to get to in a moment. And so we just keep adding to the monument of false doctrine. Verse 7, little children, 1 John 3:7, let no one mislead you. He who carries on righteousness is righteous, just as That one is righteous, talking about Jesus. Trinitarians, you know, it's not talking about God imputing anything to us, or it says, he who carries on righteousness is righteous just as. So by something we do, we become what? Just as righteous as Jesus? If we adopted the Trinitarians' understanding of just as, that's what it would mean. Very similar to the whole purify himself just as that one is pure in verse 3, 1 John 3. 1 John 4:17, this is how love has been made perfect with us. We have freeness of speech in the day of judgment because just as that one is, so are we ourselves in this world. Are we perfect? Are we sinless? It says that we may have freeness of speech in the day of judgment because just as that one is, so are we ourselves in this world. No, we're not the same as Jesus in this world, are we? And yet he says, just as that one is, so are we ourselves in this world. We're similar. We try to be like him. But just as John also wrote, we sin, unlike him. Not exact, not to the same degree, Trinitarians, and you know that. For whatever reason, you just collapse when it comes to actually doing a word study over something so simple as KATHOS. And then you just lie to everybody when it comes to John 5:22 and 23, because verse 22 makes it plain there's a difference, disproves the Trinity, and also shows that KATHOS does not mean exactly the same to the same degree in that text based on what is said in verse 22. And of course, the uses of KATHOS that we've been reviewing. All right, our last one. Revelation 10, I saw another angel descending from heaven, arrayed with a cloud, and a rainbow was on his head. Face as the sun, feet were as fiery pillars, right? Just like Jesus in Revelation 1 and 2, right? A spirit, Trinitarians. No flesh here. This is a spiritual description, just like in Daniel chapter 10. And he had in his hand a little scroll open, and he set his right foot upon the sea, but his left was upon the earth. And he, that is the angel, cried out with a loud voice, just as when a lion roars. I don't think the roar of the angel and a lion is exactly the same, Trinitarians. I think there's probably a difference. I don't think the angels have the exact same vocal mechanism as lions do. I'm going to say this is similar, but not exactly the same, okay? Now let's go to this whole honoring thing as we get to Revelation 5 and wrap this up, or we're getting close, everyone, but we needed to understand KATHOS. We needed to understand just as and how this word is used, and of course read the context of John 5:23, specifically verse 22. Let's look at some of these honor texts in the New Testament. Hebrews 2:8 and 9, all things you subjected under his feet. Talking about mankind from Psalm 8. For in that he subjected all things to him, God left nothing that is not subject to him. Just like it talks about in Psalm 8. All physical things, right? All things is context specific. Trinitarians just collapse when it comes to Colossians 1:15 through 17 and John 1:1 through 3. And especially if they see other, they go bananas. Even though they don't believe all things means all things in Colossians 1:18. Where it says Jesus is the first in all things. They don't believe he's the first creation. They don't believe he's the first murderer, first liar. They're just lying, right? If you the very preceding verses, they'll go crazy over other being there. And all the while they see all things in verse 18 and they know they don't believe he's the first in all things. They just don't want to talk about it because it would get in the way of their criticism of verses 16 and 17. Now, though, we do not yet see all things in subjection to him, right? In the first century, not all things were subjected to mankind because of the fall. Man was originally made that way, according to the psalm that they're quoting. but then after the fall, that changed. Verse 9, but we behold Jesus, right? Like right now in the first century, who has been made a little lower than angels, right? When he became a man, crowned with glory and honor for having suffered death, right? As a man. He's crowned with glory and honor for having suffered death. I'm gonna highlight that in blue because that's a clue of the significance of that part of this text. The rest of it, that he by God's undeserved kindness might taste death for every man. What does this text directly connect the glory and honor Jesus receives with? What's it directly connected with? I highlighted it in blue, and I'm sure you could see. For having suffered death, right? He was crowned with glory and honor. We behold Jesus in the first century, right? Like Paul when he saw him at his right hand. And John in the Revelation, the times before he gives him the future visions, when he's talking to the congregations and to John. Having suffered death qualifies him for glory and honor. And in John 5:22 and 23, the Father gives, didomi, Trinitarians, the authority to judge to the Son. So all may honor the Son as they honor the Father. And in John 17, we saw that he's given glory. And gives that glory to the disciples as well, which we're going to see is true. Right here, though, being crowned with glory and honor is explicitly tied with him having suffered death. It's not because he's God, just like in John 5:22 through 23, the honor and authority to judge isn't his because he's God. It's his because God gives it to him. And in Philippians 2, a text we've been alluding to and we frequently cite, look at the similarity with Hebrews 2:8 and 9. For this very reason, God exalted him to a superior position and gave him the name above every name, so that in the name of Jesus, every knee should bend of those in heaven and on earth and those under the ground, and every tongue openly acknowledge that Jesus is Lord to the glory of God the Father. The immediately preceding texts, 7 and 8, I didn't include them here, but I want to. So let me grab them real quick. We'll put those right here. Right? So verse 7, he emptied himself, took a slave's form, came to be in the likeness of men. Last Adam, 1 Corinthians 15:45. Verse 8, more than that, when he found himself in fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient as far as death. Yes, death on a torture stake. We're going to put that in blue again, just like Hebrews 2:8, for having suffered death, obedient as far as death, death on a torture stake. For this very reason, right? It's like you can't miss it, right? Can you? Verse 9, Hebrews chapter 2, crowned with glory and honor for having suffered death. Philippians 2:8, he became obedient as far as death. Verse 9, for this reason, God exalted him. Right? That's glory and honor. Would you not say verses 9 through 11 are glory and honor? But to whose glory ultimately, right? The Father. He's crowned with it because he didn't have it. Just like he didn't have the authority that leads to him being honored like the Father. The Father already has it. He allows Jesus to have it. He gives Jesus the glory. John 17, we read it earlier. He gives him the glory. He allows him to have the honor. John 5:22, he committed all judging so that, in order that, all may honor the Son as they honor the Father. It's because of the giving. Ditto me, Trinitarians. It's because the Father gave the Son what he didn't have. He gives him what he didn't have because of what he ends up doing right here. Because he gave his life. First, 2 Peter 1:17, for he received from God the Father honor and glory, when words such as these were borne to him by magnificent glory, this is my Son, my beloved, whom I myself have approved. Right? And he not only said that to him from heaven when he was being glorified, but it's also applicable to his resurrection, according to Hebrews chapter 1, right? I myself have begotten you. In the context of him giving his life once again, right? If we go back to Hebrews 1, it does the exact same thing. I talked about this in my videos earlier in the Bible and the Trinity and Conflict series, where we covered the first two chapters and part of 3, and went over all of this and showed explicitly how it connects with the same reason why Jesus receives all this. Right, so we saw it in Hebrews 2:9. We saw it in Philippians 2:8 and 9. Look at Hebrews 1:4. No, 3. He's the reflection of God's glory. He's not God's glory, Trinitarians. He's the reflection of the glory. And he's given glory by God. The exact imprint copy. Video on the channel. I encourage you to watch it. Very clear what that means. But let's move forward. He sustains all things by the word of his power. We know this to be true from all kinds of texts which talk about the role of the Son in creation. After he made a purification for our sins, right? What is that? That's dying and giving his life, right? That's exactly what we're talking about right here. Having suffered death, that he by God's undeserved kindness might taste death for every man. That's the same thing right here. After he made a purification for our sins, after he died, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty. It's all tied to him giving his life, sacrificing himself as the last Adam. That's why he's given the authority in John 5:22 and 23. That's why he's sitting down at the right hand of the Majesty in lofty places. Sorry. Let me bring up the other text. There we go. That's why he's crowned with glory and honor. That's why God exalted him to a position he didn't have before, Trinitarians. If he was already God, he would have already had the glory. He would have already had the honor. He would have already had the authority to judge. He would have already had the position. He would have already had the name. And yet every single one of these texts say the same thing. He's given it all. He's given the glory. He's given glory and honor right here in Hebrews 2:9. He's given a new position higher than what he had, because obviously if he already had it, he wouldn't need to be given it. He's given the authority to judge, John 5:22. And he's given a new name. So it obviously wasn't his from all eternity. And therefore, I don't see how it could possibly be the divine name here. And if it is, as I discussed in part 3 in the Bible and the Trinity and Conflict, then he's being given the divine name in the same way that the angel of Exodus 23 and elsewhere is given the divine name. As God's representative, as the one who's given the authority to act as him, to pardon or not pardon, to sit on his throne and judge. Because the Father gave it to him, Trinitarians. It's not something only God can have. Proven by the fact God gives it to someone else. You're just assuming your doctrine when you say that. Oh, it's only something God can have. No, that's disproven by the fact he actually gives it to someone else. You're just assuming only God can have it because you can't explain God giving it to the one you say is already God without assuming your doctrine. I think all of these are very clear and say exactly the same thing. He's exalted, crowned with glory and honor, given a new name, given a new position, seated at the right hand of majesty because he died faithful. Even 2 Peter 1:17, he received from God the Father honor and glory. Let's take a look at 2 Peter. Sorry, I could bring it up in the Bible Hub, but I have it pretty conveniently right here. I can just refer to it since we're not going to do a full text analysis. But just so we have the word clear, he received labon, a form of lambano. Labon is the form. He received from God the Father honor and glory. Timain kai doxon. He received that, Trinitarians. Lambano. It's all temporal. No one gives the Father honor and glory in this way. He doesn't receive it as something he didn't already have. He could be exalted, right? I had a Trinitarian actually quote Psalm 46 and say, well, even God is exalted there. He's given exaltation. He's exalted among the nations. And as you'll see in our Comments Review discussion this Sunday, when we go over the comments that were posted in the Monument to Sam Shamoun's Heresies, you're going to see that the psalm that the Trinitarian referred to is not using the word that means the same thing. And you can be lifted up in praise, right? Exalted, praised among the nations. That's not what we're talking about in Philippians 2. That's not what we're talking about in Hebrews 2. It's not what we're talking about in Hebrews 1. In all of those texts, we're talking about being given a position, authority, not being lifted up in praise. I mean, he's being honored in praise too, but it's because of the position. It's because of the name God gives him. That's not what Psalm 46 is talking about. No one is giving God a name. No one is giving God a position. No one is giving God authority to judge. He's just being praised or lifted up in the nations. We'll talk about it more this Sunday. But the things Trinitarians come up with are incredible. And they just show, they really, like with just as, KATHOS, as we saw, really reflect a failure to do some just basic research in the Bible. But it's not going to help them, right? So why do it? They need to promote their false doctrine. and if that's your goal, right? If your goal isn't to find out what the Bible actually teaches, but to promote later doctrine, you're not going to do this kind of study. You're not going to do it not where it matters, not where it needs to be done in order to determine if what you're saying is true. Revelation 3, 7 through 9. We're getting close to the end, everyone. Thanks for joining me. And to the angel of the congregation in Philadelphia, write, these are the things he says, who is holy, who is true, who has the key of David, who opens so no one will shut, and shuts so no one opens. I know your deeds. Look, I've set before you an open door which no one can shut. But you have a little power, and you kept my word and did not prove false to my name. Verse 9, look, I will give those from the synagogue of Satan who say they are Jews, yet they are not, but they're lying. Look, I will make them come and do worship, proskuneo, before your feet, all the way down, right at the feet of the disciples, worship, and make them know I have loved you. Right? So we clearly, and then I did a whole video on worship words in the Bible, and I've talked about this in my writings with numerous examples from the Old and New Testaments that show that proskuneo is given to a large number of individuals for honor and respect and even worship in many instances. But where it concerns Jesus and his disciples here, it's always qualified by being permitted by God. Jesus doesn't receive anything if he's not on the Father's throne. And as you're going to see in a moment, he conquers and then sits down on the throne, consistent with all the other texts we just read that show that the reason he's given this position and authority and honor and glory is because he lived and died as a man and proved himself faithful. He didn't have it from all eternity, and it does not make him equivalent to God. It's specific because of his human sacrifice. God's honor and worship and glory has nothing to do, God the Father, with him proving himself faithful as a man. So it couldn't possibly be the same. And when we get to Revelation 5, you're going to see same thing. Verse 20, Revelation 3, right? We just read how Jesus would make others come and worship before his disciples' feet. Now look. Verse 20, look, I'm standing at the door knocking. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into his house and take the evening meal with him and he with me. The one that conquers, excuse me, my water right here. Excuse me. Verse 21, to the one that conquers, I will grant to sit down with me on my throne, even as I conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. This right here even as I conquered, that refers, if you just read the rest of the opening chapters of Revelation and a little bit past this even, and of course he's even talking right to the one that conquers. And again, if you want to just look at that on your own, it's very clear. That has to do with actually giving your life like he did. And that's why he said, it says here, if you conquer like I did, you're going to sit on my Father's throne just like I did. So Trinitarians, you don't understand the Bible. And your doctrine is the reason. You're not dumb, incapable of understanding this. You just refuse to. And some of you have issues with your spiritual condition, but many of you are actually fairly normal and you just have loyalty to this doctrine. A non-biblical doctrine. A doctrine that doesn't allow you to understand the difference between the Father, whose throne it is, and him allowing someone to sit on it because they show their obedience and worship to him. And then Jesus doing that exact same thing and giving the exact same authority on the exact same throne to others. And you just somehow don't ever bring this text up when it comes to Jesus being given glory and honor or worship with the Father on his throne. This just seems to totally escape you, huh? Well, again, I think it's your false doctrine. I think you just don't want to deal with these texts that are problematic. All right, let's read our last series of texts right into Revelation 5, discuss it contextually, wrap it up, and I'll see you tomorrow. Verse 1 of chapter 4. After these things I saw and look, an open door in heaven, and the first voice that I heard was as of a trumpet, speaking with me, saying, come on up here, and I shall show you the things that must take place. After these things, I immediately came to be in the power of the Spirit. And look, a throne was in its position in heaven, and there's one seated upon the throne. It's just so we keep that in mind, right? There's a throne in its position in heaven, right? This is right after, like literally a couple verses after Jesus just told him, I conquered and sat down with my Father on his throne. And if you conquer, you will sit with me on that same throne. So then he goes on, John receives a vision of a throne in heaven. And there's one seated upon the throne. And the one seated is in appearance like a jasper stone and a precious red-colored stone. And around about the throne there's a rainbow like an emerald in appearance. And round about the throne there are 24 thrones, and upon these thrones I saw seated 24 elders dressed in white outer garments, and upon their heads golden crowns. And out of the throne there are proceeding lightnings and voices and thunders. And there are 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, and these mean the 7 spirits of God. I did a whole video on the 7 spirits of God. You can look through the video playlist, check the titles, you'll see it. Verse 6, chapter 4, and before the throne there is as it were a glassy sea like crystal. And in the midst of the throne and around the throne 4 living creatures, full of eyes in front and behind. Verse 7, and the first living creature is like a lion, the second's like a young bull, third face is like a man's, fourth living creature is like a flying eagle. Verse 8, and the 4 living creatures, each one of them respectively has 6 wings. Round about and underneath they are full of eyes, and they have no rest day and night as they say, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord, or Jehovah God. Here I would use Lord because I don't believe it's a quotation or an explicit enough allusion to an Old Testament text to use it. But it's referring to God, clearly. God the Almighty, who is and who was and who is coming, right? Just like Revelation 1:4. God is here identified, the Almighty, as the one who is and who was and who is coming, who is seated on the throne, who is differentiated from Jesus and the 7 spirits in Revelation 1. And here differentiated from the 7 spirits, right, that are represented by the 7 lamps. So clearly this one is different from those 7 spirits, and as the one who is and was and was coming, different from Jesus as well. And then it goes on, verse 9. Whenever the living creatures offer glory and honor and thanksgiving to the one seated on the throne, the one that lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before the one seated upon the throne and worship the one that lives forever and ever. They cast their crowns before the throne, saying, You are worthy. Jehovah, it says in MT, but I think this would also be another instance where Lord would be appropriate, because it's not a clear quotation or an explicit allusion to an Old Testament text with a divine name. You are worthy, Lord, even our God, to receive the glory and the honor and the power, right? Here, this is what I meant earlier. There's a sense in which you can receive glory and honor, right? Like praise, like the Psalm 46:10, I believe, that we'll talk more about in the comments review section on Sunday. We can glorify God, right? But we're not like giving him his actual glory. We're giving him praise. We can honor God, right? We give him praise, exalt him. But the texts we've been referring to aren't just talking about Jesus being given praise. They're talking about him being given a position, a place at God's right hand, on God's throne, and a new name, and authority, right, that he didn't have before. Authority to judge. It's not just glory in the sense of praise and adulation and worship. Now, that does come up here in just a second. You're going to see. But there's a difference, right? There's a difference between giving us, like if we glorify God, that's different than God glorifying Jesus by raising him to heaven at his right hand, right? I mean, he's being lifted up to a position and then praised as a result of that position. When we glorify God, it's not because he's being given a new position. We just glorify him as God. With Jesus, it is explicitly tied to him being given a new position because of what he did. Now look right here. Look at what it says. Now remember, this word right here, look, whenever. We're going to make that blue. Revelation 4:9, we'll go to that as well. Sorry, I still have to adjust my monitor setup here. It's terrible, but I'll get to it. It's not as easy as it seems, though. Yes, hatan, whenever, meaning at any time that the living creatures offer glory and honor, anytime the living creatures offer the one seated on the throne, the one called Lord and God, who is said to have created all things, because of your will they existed and were created. Right here we have katizo, right? In an active sense. This is exactly what we don't have in Colossians 1. Right? We do have the passive form used right here, but we have the active form right here in verse 11. Right? Ektisas. And then we have the passive form used, showing clearly the contrast, ektistesan. They were created through Jesus, just like all things were subjected by God to Jesus. Here, Trinitarians, you have what you don't have in Colossians 1. You have the active form of katizo, which is never used of Jesus with regard to creation of things. Not like creating a new personality. This is exactly what we're talking about, Trinitarians. So this one here, it says whenever. I should probably different. That's critical, right? Whenever. Hatan. Revelation 4:9, Trinitarians. Whenever the living creatures offer glory and honor and thanksgiving to the one seated on the throne, they do some certain specific things, it says. It says they cast their crowns, but it says you're worthy to receive it. They tell him why he's worthy. You are worthy to receive because you created all things, and because of your will, they existed and were created. That's why he receives glory and honor right here, Trinitarians. It's not because he's given a new position. He's the one seated upon the throne. He's already there. He doesn't conquer and then sit down. It's his throne. The one Jesus was just talking about at the end of chapter 3, right before he starts talking about this throne in heaven. And you're going to see he's different from it in just the next verse. Hang on. But right here, right, it's very clear, whenever, Trinitarians, whenever the four living creatures offer glory and honor and thanksgiving, they attribute the glory and honor that God receives to him being worthy because he created all things. You are worthy because you created all things. In fact, in the Greek, it uses that term worthy, axios. Now look at the next, right, we get into chapter 5 now. And it says, and I saw in the right hand of the one seated on the throne a scroll written within and on the reverse side, sealed tight with 7 seals. I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, who is worthy? Who is worthy? We'll just verify that's the same word. That's in verse 2. And again, we get the Greek term axios. Sorry, I got to move my monitor and I got to try to hook it up so we can see, or use the Bible Hub. But it's convenient for other. That's where I do my translation work, like a different station. So again, God is worthy because he created all things. And whenever the living creatures offer glory and honor, that's what they tell him. Then this angel comes up. There's a scroll in the one seated upon the throne's hands, And an angel says, who's worthy to open that? Verse 3, neither in heaven nor upon the earth nor underneath the earth, nor was there a single one able to open the scroll or look into it. And I gave way to a great deal of weeping because no one was found worthy to open the scroll or to look into it. But one of the elders says to me, stop weeping. Look, the Lion that is of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has conquered. Remember the conquering part we talked about earlier? Giving your life. That's the reason Jesus is given this position, this honor, and this glory. Has conquered so as to open the scroll and its 7 seals. And notice, everybody, look at the all-encompassing language here. Neither in heaven, nor on earth, nor underneath the earth was anyone able to open it. But then it immediately goes on to identify someone who can open it. The Bible very frequently uses all-inclusive language, like I mentioned earlier with Colossians 1, 16, 17, and 18, that Trinitarians rarely bring up. Often uses all-inclusive language with explicit exceptions. This is very similar to Colossians 1 in providing an all-inclusive description, like there's no exception, similar also to John 1, 1 through 3, but then immediately giving an exception, which John 1:18 and Colossians 1:15 both also do. Very important you understand how the Bible talks, because Trinitarians, they're very anachronistic. Right? They'll read back into the text the way we kind of talk now, where we don't often make such all-inclusive statements, although we often do as well when the exceptions are explicit. In any case, once again, we get having conquered directly tied to being worthy or receiving something, as you're going to see. Verse 6, I saw standing in the midst of the throne and of the 4 living creatures in the midst of the others, a lamb, as though it had been slaughtered, having 7 horns and 7 eyes, which eyes mean the 7 spirits of God that have been sent forth into the whole earth, right? Like Jesus says in John 15, he talks about the Holy Spirit and receiving the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit being sent by him and by the Father to the earth. Well, in Revelation 1:4, the 7 spirits give greetings with God and Jesus, and throughout Revelation, as I talk about my 7 spirits video, are identified, it seems to me, as the Holy Spirit, either collectively or individually, but as 7 spirits that act as the one Holy Spirit of God. It's hard to fully understand because it's metaphysic. That's how it's presented to us. So we're a little flexible when it comes to the Holy Spirit being a person or the personalized Spirit of God, or just how many spirits it might be if it's an individual spirit. The Bible says 7. But we try to make allowances because it's metaphysics. Unlike Trinitarians who present a metaphysics from Constantine, displace it, the metaphysic given to us by Paul in the Bible, and then tell us we have to believe it or we're heretics. It's incredible. Verse 7, and he went at once and took it out of the right hand of the one seated on the throne. So clearly Jesus is not the one seated on the throne here, right? And if the 7 spirits that he has and that are represented by the 7 lampstands before the throne are the Holy Spirit, again, the one seated on the throne, who is said to have been worthy because he created all things, that has to be the Father. Right? He's on the throne. Right after Jesus said he sat down on his Father's throne, and the throne is described in ways that are then differentiated from the Lamb. The one seated on the throne is then differentiated from the Lamb. So very clearly, the Lamb is not the one seated on the throne here, is he? He's taking the scroll out of the hand of the one seated on the throne. Verse 8, and when he took the scroll, the 4 living creatures and 24 elders fell down before the Lamb. It doesn't say proskuneo, but it uses a term that means to fall down, right? Just like you'll see used of others in the Bible. Just like would have to be true of the disciples in Revelation 3:9, because it's at their feet. The people would have, whoever Jesus brings to worship before their feet would have to be on the ground, or they're not worshiping before their feet. So that is not unusual. In fact, it's very common, right? Before the kings in the Old Testament, before various figures of honor, Jacob before Esau, Right? He bowed down to him numerous times on the way to him, right, to try to appease him. The 24 elders bow down before the Lamb, right? And who is the Lamb, everybody? The Lamb is different from the one seated on the throne. We just saw that. The Lamb took the scroll out of the hand of the one seated on the throne. The Lamb conquered so as to open the scroll. Again, directly tying his death and resurrection with the authority and position and honor he receives in all those other texts we read. So here we get it again. And so it says the 4 living creatures and 24 elders fell down before the Lamb, right? Once again, we get the 4 living creatures. Remember earlier when the living creatures were described? Right? Talked about the types of living creatures right here. And then it says, whenever, hatan, the living creatures offer glory and honor, they say this. Whenever. But here, when they fall down before the Lamb and start to sing, the living creatures say this. You are worthy, axios, to take the scroll and open its seals because you were slaughtered. Remember, I told you, it always connects Jesus' glory, honor, new name, new position, all of it. It's always temporally related to his death and resurrection. He didn't have it. He had to be given it. Even John 5:22 says the Father gave him the authority, so he received that honor. Right here, not only is it connecting the glory, honor, and even worship that the Lamb is receiving with the Lamb dying and being resurrected, but they're singing a different song. It says, whenever, hatan, whenever the living creatures offer glory and honor and thanksgiving to the one seated on the throne, the one they call Lord and God, and who created all things, active form of KATHOS, Trinitarians. It says whenever they offer him glory and honor and thanksgiving, they say he's worthy because he created all things, active form of KATHOS. When they bow before the Lamb and sing and give him glory and honor, they sing something totally different. They say, you're worthy to take the scrolls because you were slaughtered. And you, with your blood, you bought persons for God out of every tribe, tongue, people, and nation. And you made them to be a kingdom and priests to our God, and they're to rule as king forever and ever. And I saw and heard a voice of many angels around the throne and the living creatures and the elders, and the number of them was myriads of myriads and thousands of thousands, saying with a loud voice, the Lamb that was slaughtered is worthy, axios, to receive the power and the riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing. The Lamb that was slaughtered, Trinitarians. Once again, everything that the Lamb is said to be worthy to receive, all of it, it's all right here. It's all in Philippians 2. It's all in Hebrews 1. It's all in Hebrews 2. They're all saying the same thing, Trinitarians. John 5. Revelation 5. The Lamb that was slaughtered, Trinitarians. That's not the Father. That's not why the Father is worthy. You know why the Father is worthy, Trinitarians? It says right here. Because he created all things. active form of katizo. The one out of Trinitarians differentiate from the Son. 1 Corinthians 8:6. Can't get any more explicit. Active form of katizo and act used of the Father, but never the Son. I think there's a reason for that, Trinitarians. The glory and the reasons for it are also different. It goes on to say in verse 13, every creature, right? This is one of our subject texts. Every creature in heaven and on earth and underneath the earth and on the sea, right? Remember, as I said earlier, that all-inclusive language, the way the Bible speaks, right? Neither in heaven nor on earth nor under the earth was there a single one, right? Nowhere. Right? There's like nowhere else to go. There is one. That's just how the Bible talks. That's how it talks in Colossians 1, how it talks in John 1, that's how it talks in Revelation 5:3. That's how it talks in Revelation 5:13. Every creature in heaven and earth and under the earth and on the sea and all the things in them I heard saying, to the one sitting on the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and the glory and might forever and ever. And the four living creatures went saying, Amen. And the elders fell down and worshipped. And that uses proskuneo right there. Now notice, when all of these are this includes the living creatures, right? It says right here, the living creatures. That's exactly who was also described right up here. Whenever Trinitarians, anytime the living creatures offer glory and honor and thanksgiving, this is going to disprove your doctrine, right? This is the end, Trinitarians. We've already shown John 5:22, 23. You got that all wrong. Just as the authority to judge, all of it. You missed it all. The honor. When the living creatures, Trinitarians, offer glory and honor and thanksgiving to the one seated on the throne, they say he's worthy because he created all things. When they speak to the Lamb alone, and say that the Lamb is worthy, they refer to him being worthy because of him being slaughtered, not because he created all things. And then, in our key verses, when they sing to both, when they give glory and honor to both God and to the Lamb, what don't you have? Well, if the Lamb is the second person of the Trinity, Trinitarians, and the Father's the first person, we basically have God here, right? In verse 13, the one sitting on the throne and the Lamb, right? Trinitarians, you would say that's God right there, right? At least two persons of God. Well, why then don't they say what Revelation 4:11 says, 4:9 through 11 says? The living creatures say every time, whenever they offer glory and honor and thanksgiving to the one seated on the throne, the Father. Very clear, right? Because the Lamb came and got the scroll, and the seven spirits are the seven lambs that the Lamb has control of. Whenever they offer glory and honor and thanksgiving to that one, they say you're worthy because you created all things. When they offer glory and honor to the Lamb and say he's worthy, it's because he was slaughtered. When they offer glory and honor and strength and blessing to both, they don't say anything about being God or refer to them as the one who created all things, which is exactly what Revelation 4:9 through 11 says. The living creatures say this whenever they offer glory and praise to the one seated on the throne. And Jesus, as we just read earlier as well, is seated on his Father's throne. But there's a clear difference when they offer it here to the one seated on the throne that the Lamb is differentiated from right here. Takes the scroll. It's just the one seated on the throne that is spoken to that way. And then immediately the Lamb comes in and is immediately given glory and honor and considered worthy for a totally different reason. The exact same reason the Lamb is elevated to a new position all throughout the New Testament. So whenever the living creatures praise the one seated on the throne, they refer to him as God who created all things. When they get to the Lamb who was worthy and given honor and glory, it's because he conquered. It's because he was slaughtered. Verse 9, chapter 5. It's not because he's God or create all things. And then when it's to the one seat on the throne, remember the four living creatures, the living creatures, it says just living creatures, but it's usually just the four living creatures. But it says living creatures, right? Well, that's exactly what it says right here. The four living creatures here, but it says here, every creature in heaven and earth and all things in them say, to the one seat on the throne be glory and honor and blessing and might forever and ever. Nothing about being God, nothing about because they created. You see, it's different when they're speaking to both of them. If they were the same, if they were being given the same honor, the way Trinitarians interpret John 5:23, honor the Son just as you honor the Father, and then they bring us to this text, then why isn't the honor and glory the same? It's clearly different, isn't it? Once again, the last time, the glory and honor given to the one seated on the throne, and the reason he's worthy, axios, is because he created all things, and he's referred to explicitly as God. When it gets to the Lamb differentiated from that one, the Lamb is worthy because the Lamb conquered and was slaughtered. It uses axios 2 times for the Lamb, and 2 times says he's worthy because he was slaughtered. Then, when the living creatures, right? Living creatures, Revelation 4:9 to God. Revelation 5:11, I heard the voice of many angels around the throne and the living creatures and the elders, and the number of them was myriads, saying with a loud voice, the Lamb that was slaughtered is worthy to receive the power and the riches and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and blessing. The living creatures are giving praise and honor to the Lamb here with the other heavenly beings. But they're not saying what the living creatures say whenever they praise the one seated on the throne. It's different, Trinitarians. He's worthy for being God who created all things. The Lamb is worthy, separate from the God who created all things, because he was slaughtered. Just like in Philippians 2, just like in Hebrews 1, just like in Hebrews 2. When the Lamb is exclusively praised on his own, it's different. He's considered worthy, same term, for different reasons, totally, right? Than God in Revelation 4:9 through 11. The Lamb is consistently worthy because he was slaughtered. God the Father seated on the throne is not described as worthy for that reason. He's described as worthy because he's God who created all things. Then, when they're both praised together, every creature, including the living creatures, speaks to God, the one seated on the throne, and to the Lamb, right? Well, they say to the one seated on the throne and to the Lamb be blessing and honor and glory and might forever and ever. Then it says the 4 living creatures went on saying, Amen. And the elders fell down and worshipped. It doesn't say who they worshipped. We could say, It's proskuneo, so there's no problem with that being directed to both God and Jesus. Again, the reason they're worthy for this worship or proskuneo could not be described in more different terms. You'd have to be a Trinitarian to miss it, just like in the other accounts we read. They're so different, it's incredible they ever made this argument, right? The level of honor is not exactly the same, Trinitarians. It's not even for the same reasons. So it couldn't possibly be the same. One is worthy because he's God who created all things. The other is worthy because he sacrificed himself to that God who then considered him worthy enough to take a scroll from his hand. And then when they're both praised together, what is said by all beings, including the living creatures, is not the same. They don't even speak to the Lamb and to the one seated on the throne using the same terms that are said to be offered whenever they praise the one seated on the throne. You know why? Because there's someone else on the throne in this part of the account. Up here, it just describes the one seated on the throne. So he's worthy because he's God, one who created all things. Then the Lamb comes into the picture, conquers, and is considered worthy because he's slaughtered, just like in Philippians 2, is for that reason elevated and given a new name, given a position that he didn't have before, to the glory of the God who gave it to him. He's raised to the right hand of the majesty, according to Hebrews 1, and crowned with glory and honor, according to Hebrews 2, for having tasted death. That has nothing to do with why God the Father seated on the throne is honored. And God the Father seated on the throne is not given the authority to judge like Jesus is in John chapter 5. So I don't think it could be any different, everyone. And you can see here, as there's another account where God is praised forever. But once again, he's referred to as God. And in the context, I believe that's the great crowd. Let's go to that real quickly. Revelation chapter 7, and we'll wrap this up, just so we have the full context of that text I cited there. Revelation chapter 12. Yeah, in fact, it's very similar, isn't it? It says, and all the angels standing around the throne and the elders and the four living creatures fell upon their faces before the throne and worshipped God, saying, Amen. The blessing and the glory and the wisdom and the thanksgiving and the honor and the power and the strength to our God. Just like Revelation chapter 4, verses 9 through 11. You are worthy, Lord, even our God, because you created all things. It's exactly what they're saying right here. All these things be to our God. That's not how the Lamb is praised individually in Revelation 5 or together with the one seated on the throne. It doesn't even refer to them both or either one of them as God, like we just saw in Revelation 7 for God, and like we see is true whenever the living creatures offer praise and say that God is worthy. He's directly referred to as being worthy as God. That is not how the Lamb is referred to 3 separate times right after that. And the Lamb is clearly distinct from the one seated on the throne, although he's seated on his Father's throne, and those who conquer are seated on his Father's throne. But the reason they're seated on the throne, everybody, the reason Jesus is given the authority to judge, is raised to the right hand in lofty places, is seated on his Father's throne, and the reason why we sit with him on his Father's throne is not the same reason. The Father is on the throne. The Father was never given his throne. No one told the Father he could sit on their throne. No one gave the Father authority to judge. It's the one God, the Father, who is empowering others to act with authority and in ways on his throne that they did not have before. And that's not because they, Jesus, or we are God who created all things. It's for the reason stated over and over and over again with regard to Jesus in Philippians 2, in Hebrews 1, in Hebrews 2, in Revelation 5, which is the same reason Jesus gives for why we're allowed to sit with him and receive all the glory and praise that he receives while we're standing on Mount Zion with him. Because we conquered. Because we died faithful to him or lived to the point where he came and caught us away to be with him and proved ourselves faithful like he did. The reason why the Father is honored has nothing to do with giving his life or dying faithful. It's because he's the God who created all things and who decides who is faithful and who will be given authority and who will sit on what throne and who will be honored for those reasons alone, just as he is honored for being God alone. Not because the honor is the same, because obviously the reasons are different. One because you died faithful, the other because you're God who created all things. Couldn't have been more clear. And yet, for some reason, Trinitarians fail to understand honor and worship. John 5:23 and Revelation 5:3 through 14.